Yo everyone, welcome back. This tutorial is on functions, and these are very important for Roblox development, so take care to actually take notes and remember stuff, because this is important. So, what are functions? We talked about them in the variables one, where we were testing out the scopes of variables and all that. But pretty much functions, to summarize, are stored blocks of code that will run when you call them. There are two types of functions. You have anonymous functions and you have named functions. So the difference between them is that anonymous functions, they don't have a name, they're created on the spot, and they are stored in memory, and particularly are used in event handlers or any sort of like event or connections. So if, like, let's say a part's touched, you can create a anonymous function. Since you don't actually have to name the function, you can make it only for the touch part. Or you can make a named function which can handle multiple touch parts at once. So I'll give you an example in code form and we'll have a look at them. So let's say workspace.baseplate.touched connect function. So this is the anonymous, no name for the function. So we're saying whenever this part, so this baseplate part is touched, we want to connect that to a function. So connect the given function to the event and returns a script connection that represents it. So this is saying our local RBX connection is equal to the workspace.touched, workspace.baseplate.touched. So that touched is an event of baseplate. And we want to connect it. So this is actually what we're being returned here. We're given the connection between the touched event and the function that's been called. So we can disconnect it, for example, so it will no longer call this function when this part is touched. We won't worry about that yet. We definitely will get into it because it's very important that you do actually handle these and like disconnect them when you're not using them anymore, that sort of stuff, otherwise you have memory leaks. But so I'll just clear that for now. But what we're saying here is when our touch event is called or fired, we want to say call this function. And by default, touched has a hit part, so this is the other part, which is a base part, and we can just print hit get full name. So returns a string describing the instance's ancestry. So that's pretty much, let's say, since it's a baseplate, the baseplate's path is workspace.baseplate. If it's our, let's say, lower left leg, it will be workspace, your player's name, lower left leg. Because it's your lower left leg is inside your avatar or your character, which is inside workspace. So we'll see the result of this, we'll get back to it. And then we have a named function, which is on, let's call it on touch. So that's our name of the function, and then we can call that. We can't call this one because it doesn't have a name. But we can call this one because we've given it a name, and we can actually just call the name. And then we can say on that touched, call on touch. And that will give us the argument there. So, actually, if you have a look here, since we've given it a hit here, it says in here, here's the argument. We've got something called hit. And in this case, we don't have anything inside here. So we'll see it will print nil because there's no argument that was passed. Now, a lot of things that you may not know, that you should probably know, is that you can pass default Roblox functions through connections like this. So since we've created a function here and we have arguments and all that, we've created a anonymous function here and it's got arguments and all that. Roblox methods or functions also do have arguments and they can be called because they've given them a name. So what I mean by this is, let's say on our baseplate's touch event, when that's fired, so when something touches our baseplate, we can connect it to something like print. We're going to say, okay, when our part is touched, connect it to the function print. So just pass everything to print and just let print do whatever it wants with it. So if I just try that out of all of this, if I just run that, you can see it does nothing yet because nothing's touching it. If I spawn a part and it touches the base plate, you can see it says part. Now, what is this printing exactly? It's printing the instance, so the actual part itself. It's not printing like the full name, which is a like path to it from workspace. It's only printing the name of the instance because that's the two-string method, which is more complicated stuff. But basically, it's just printing the name of the part because we're just passing it straight to the print function, and the print function does whatever it wants with it. If I take out the anonymous function and only use an anonymous function, you'll see that we create a function on the spot and we have a parameter here, and we're going to get the full name of that, whatever is being passed through. So if I place that now, you can see it says workspace.part, because that part is under workspace and it's not under anything else. That is what's being passed. Oh, that's the path to it, I mean. And also you'll notice that now there's a touch interest inside this base plate. That's because the .touched event uses these touch interests to register the fact that whenever something touches its base plate, it needs to call this touch interest, and then it'll trigger all the events attached to it. What I can actually do though is we want to test this get full name further. Let's put it deeper into the game. So deeper means something, or make the depth bigger. So right now it's under workspace, but we can put underneath this touch interest here. And that means it's going to be under workspace, it's going to be under base plate, under touch interest, and then that's the actual part. So now if I move this up and let it touch it, you can see it says workspace.baseplate.touchinterest.part. So now it's actually following our ancestry of where that part is. So if I stop the game here, so that's the anonymous one, we can actually try the called one now. And there's two ways it can work. So actually let's just try the same function here. So we're just going to print the full name. I'm going to say on touch, we're not going to pass anything. We're just going to see what it does with nil. And then we're going to set up the event and we're going to connect it to the on touch. So that way when anything touches a base plate, it's going to call this function instead. So if I try run that, we're going to get an error. It says attempt to index nil with get full name. Since we're passing nothing into it, it's going to try call this get full name function, but it's nothing, so it's not going to be able to call it because it's just nothing. So what we need to do is pass something in. If I try pass like any value, like false, if I try pass a number, so it says index boolean with get full name. So get full name is not part of the boolean. It's not part of a number. So what is get full name part of? Well, we know definitely now that it's an instance or any, like, let's say part, because this hit here is whatever's touching it. And because we made that part touch the base plate, we just need to know what the part is, and that part is a base part, it's a part, it's an instance. So it's any of them definitely have to get full name. So I'm just trying to say here is what we're trying to call here isn't in anything, or isn't in everything. It's only in specific things. How can we figure out what this get full name method is in? Because it's not in a number, it's not in a boolean. What is it in specifically? That's where we get our API. So if you open up your page, you'll see docs here. Open it. And you'll get here, we can go to the API reference page, and we're looking for the get full name. Now it won't show up here because these are like actual objects and all that. What we need to do is search for it. Get full name. Here we go. We have instance get full name. So returns a string describing the instance's ancestry. So this is a function of instance. Okay. So it's an instance, and that means our part is an instance. Is that true? So let's have a look at baseplate, for example. This is a part. So if we look at class name here, it says part. Does this baseplate have a get full name? Let's have a look. So in the command bar, we're going to say workspace.baseplate get full name. So it appears. So you can see it says self instance. So why does it appear here, even though this is a part? This is called or this is actually part of the object-oriented programming, which we'll get into. But basically, this base plate is a instance, but it's also a part. From this point to the next clip, I went and opened up the API page on developer.roblox.com or developer.roblox.com, and I went to the opening page so that way we could go to the base part and have a look at the properties and all the functions which we can look and use in our script. So just a heads up there, and back to the video. Alright, now that we're in the API page, we need to find where instances are. So the reason why we want to look at an instance is because hit is a instance, but number isn't. So number is a very low class type, so it means like every programming language has this. But a instance is defined by Roblox, so it's a higher language one. So it's something that's added to the environment. So if we have a look here, made up of all classes, we can see we find a list of everything. We're looking for instance. So what is a instance? An instance is the base class for all classes in Roblox hierarchy. So pretty much everything in the game is a instance. And if we have a look at what instances have, they have archivable, class name, name, parent, all these here. But they also have our function that we're looking for, the get full name. So that means anything that is a instance has this get full name method or function. And so that means numbers are not instances, so they don't have it. Strings are not instances, so they don't have it. But a instance itself, so like a base part, mesh part, any accessory objects, camera objects, anything like that, they are all instances, so they have this get full name function we can call. So we can't pass a number, but we can pass a instance. So let's pass in workspace.baseplate. So we're going to pass in baseplate, this object here. So this actual object, the object itself, we're going to pass in, and we're going to get the full name of that object. So if I run this again, it's going to give us workspace.baseplate, because that is the instance we pass through, and it's got the hierarchy path to it, or the ancestry path. Now if we add a part, it's going to say workspace.part, because that is the path from workspace to the parent, or to the actual instance. If I add this under the touch interest, and we drop it again, you can see it says workspace.baseplate.touchinterest.part, so it's still following the hierarchy rule, but we have made it so we can call this function as well as hook it up to events. So usually most of the time you don't need to actually keep the function out in the open like this. So let's say you're only using it for this .touched. You can just create an anonymous function and just have it nice and tidy instead of having to create a function every single time and then call it like so. Or you don't even need to do that, you can just have it like that. There's different use cases for this. Generally, you don't really need the onTouch function like this, specifically for this baseplate.touched, or the .touched for any base part. But for something like players added, that's something where you do want to create a function for it, because there is some things that can happen. So let's create a function called player added. So this is going to be for when players join the game, right? So we need the service players. So if we have a look at players here, you can see we've got like respawn time, character auto loads, but we need to actually look for something else. We need to look at the API reference for the events of players, because we want to know what we can hook up this function to. So let's have a look under players, not player, players. And let's look for something that tells us when a player joins the game. So we have properties here, we have functions, and then we should have events. So let's have a look at events. So we've got stuff like friend request, game announce, player added. That's the event we want. So if I open that, it's actually already given us code examples here. So we have local players equals game get service players. So that's how we get the player service. We use game get service. A lot of users may do like game.players, but use get service because it's much safer. And then we have players.player added connect function. So this is the anonymous function form of what we're trying to do. And then there's also player removing connect function player. So what do we note here? The parameter is always the player, and there's nothing else that's being passed through. So our first variable here is player, which is a player that's joining or the player that's leaving in this bottom case. So now if we put the argument here, player, we know that it's a player that's joining the game. And then we can hook this up. So players.playerAdded, connect it to a function, player added. In this case, it doesn't matter that we've named it the same thing, because we're not shadowing players.playerAdded. It's its own variable, and to access this player added event variable, we have to go through the players here. So it doesn't really matter. But there we go. So when a player joins, which by the way, if we have a look here, the player is a type of player. So if we open that up, a player is blah blah blah, the instance.name. So the player is a instance. So that means if we scroll down, we should have the get full name method. So if we have a look, what is that, event? So it says actually here, inherited from instance. So this is a instance. So we have a look at, right here, get full name. So get full name is part of the instance class, and this player is a instance. And it's also a player, which is part of object-oriented programming. So if we have a look here, we can do print player get full name. Now, obviously it didn't auto-complete it because it doesn't actually know this is a player. So there's two things we can do. If you have lower U enabled and you've got strict mode, you have to do a instance here. However, if you don't have lower U enabled like I've got right now, we can set it to player and it will specifically show everything that's available for a player object. So now if I put a dot here, it's going to show us all the properties of the player we can edit. And if I do a colon, it's going to show us all the functions of a player we can use. There we go. So if we have a look, we get full name, returns a string describing the instance's ancestry. So now let's print that. And if I try to run the game right now, it's not going to know that I'm there, because I'm not actually in the game. This is server only mode. So current is server. But if I play the game with my character, you'll see that it's blue, and that means I'm on the client. Current client. And there we go. Players, basic to advanced scripting. So it knows that I'm under players, and I am basic to advanced scripting. Because the parameter here is the actual player object itself. It's the instance. Now, there's a problem. If I have this script wait 3 seconds before it sets up this event, it won't pick us up joining because we've already joined, but this is only for newly joined players. So if I play that again, we're going to see that it doesn't actually output that we joined. How can we fix this? Well, let's say, why not call this function on every player that's already in the game and then set up the event for anyone that's joining the game? So if I do, first of all, we need to get the players. So how do we get the players? Is there a method here? Let's have a look. Get friends, get, where is it? Actually, we can just search it like this. Get what? What are we looking for? We want something. Oh, sorry, under player. We want to go to players and do it. So get. So event of players. Let's go to the players. Get. What do we have here? Get players. That sounds interesting. Return a table of all presently connected player objects. So note it says player objects. So that means it's the player instance itself. So, returns a table. So a table is just like a container. So it will hold all the players in this container, and we can loop through that container and access each of the player inside it. So let's do local already joined players. Actually, let me do already joined players equals players get players. So that's a table of instances. So now that we know it's an instance, we can pass it through this function here. How do we do that? How do we get each player out of here? This was missed in the last loops tutorial because we had to apply it to a table only, which is I pairs and pairs. We can do a generic loop like for I equals 1 number of this table. Do. So hashtag means get the length of the table. So we can say for 1 to the number of players in this table, the actual player itself is the table at index I. So this is saying for every item inside this player's table, so loop through it, for each of those players, so get the actual value, so that's what this does, this gets the value at the index. We want to pass it to our player added here. So now that we've done that, that's going to work. It's going to say, okay, for I equals 1 number of players do, so the number of players that are in the game currently, just pass it to the player added event. However, we can make this neater. We can say, so actually for the I here is index, and then the player there is a value at the index in the table. So that's the player object at the index in the table. So that if we print the already joined players here, let's just print it and then we can do the, that way you can see what it is. So we got a table of instances. So for I, so it's at at index 1, it is me, basic to advanced scripting. If you have other players, it would be like maybe index 1 is that player. Index 2 is you. Index 3 is a different person. So that's what the index is. And then this is the value, which is the actual player object itself at that index. So what I can do now is say for index value, so we're going to do it at the same time in I pairs, that's numerically ordered looping. So it's going to keep the order of whatever this table gives us. So we're going to pass in there. So T is for table, returns a iterator function and the table for use in a loop, in a for loop. So what it's doing is it's going to loop through them automatically for us. So this is a table of players and it's going to loop through them, giving us the index and value for every single one of them inside that table. And then we just do that and we don't need any of that. So if we actually print index of value, and we can actually use value get full name, and I join the game, let's see what it gives us. So the first index is players.basic to advanced scripting, because I'm the only one in the game. And then this one is from the player added function. Now, since this function here is used here as well here, we have to follow the rules that the first argument is the player. If I didn't do that here, we don't have to follow the rules. We can put this anywhere else in the argument space. So like I can have index player. And we have index there. But this player added event here only passes a player. It doesn't know that it wants to know that, or it doesn't know that this one's supposed to be the index. It only knows pass player to whatever's the function. So what we need to do is we'll have index as the second argument. So player added, we'll pass in the player first, the same as this, but we'll also pass in the index afterwards. And then we can print it. We can print index player, or index comma player get full name. And then we'll get rid of that. And let's see what this does. It's going to say 1 basic to advanced scripting. Okay. Now let's get rid of this task.wait. What does that do? Nil players to advanced scripting. The reason for that is because it caught us joining the game. It only passes a playthrough. It doesn't know that we've got another argument here, index. So it doesn't know to pass it through. And it won't even know the index because the index is provided because we loop through a table. and that table has index values. And so like for every index, there is a value associated with it. But yeah, so that's functions there. Actually, I think I went through events too on accident, but you can see that it is important that you take care when you're doing this, because if you don't consider things like this when you got event and for loop set up like this, you can mess up a lot, and I've seen it happen. So usually you don't need to pass the index through, so just keep it like that. Just keep it consistent. You just want the player added. You want to pass in the player itself. So actually this is the player object, and because we don't use an index at all, we can make it an underscore. And doing that underscore there is good practice, because it says this variable is not being used, so just hide it. So even if we try like use underscore, it's going to underline red, because incomplete statement, expected assignment or function call. Lua doesn't recognize underscore as a variable. So if I do that, it will set it to 3, but if I try print underscore, it's going to underline red, because placeholder value underscore is red here. Consider using a named variable. So saying, don't use underscore, use something else if you're going to use this. There we go. That's functions, so that's like an example here. Let's also do another one quickly, which is function character added. Okay, so in players added, we know a player is joining, but have our character added. How do we know when a character's being added? Let's have a look at the API again. So returns a table of all presently connected players. So we know that we're having players, this player object, as our object here for the argument. So now we need to find something that lets us know when the character is added in the player. So we can see straight away there's something called character here, but that's our property. So that means that will change whether or not, or when. So that character there will change to match whatever character the player is using. But we're looking for the event that says this character has been added or removed. Or, in our case, has been added. So we'll take note of that, because we can actually use that again for something like we did here. We can call the character added with the character, but also set up an event for it. But we're looking for the event where character is added. So let's scroll down to events. Event, first up, we've got character added, and that passes the model for the character. So now that we know this is a model, let's put it there, and we're going to print the full name of that character, because a model is also a instance. So if we open up the model here, let's see, inherited from PV instance, inherited from instance. So we know that's inheriting from instance, so it's a instance, but it's also a model, and it's also a PV model, so it's taking in additional information, or different properties, different functions as its own. Okay, so now that we know that, let's have a look how we can set up this character added event. So remember, we're doing it for each player, so we want to have it inside the player added, and we want to say player.character added, so it's a signal, so we have to connect a function to it. So player.character added, fired when a player's character spawns or respawns, we want to connect that to a function, which is character added. And also what we can do is, if player.character, then character added player.character. And there we go. So that means for any players, when their character is added to the game, or when their character loads or respawns or whatever, we're going to call this function with their character. But there's one problem. What if you want to edit the player, but you're only given the character? There's two ways you can get the player from this. One is local player equals players get player from character. So returns a player whose player.character matches the given instance, or nil if one cannot be found. So what we can say is use this function, and we can pass a character there, and that's the player that called it, right? However, what we can also do is change this so we have our player first, and then our character is given. Now, I just said that we can't change how the events pass variables through, but what we can do is use anonymous functions to call this with the arguments we want. So if I do, instead of connect character added, we do connect function, and we get our character model here. What I can say is call that character added with that character model, and we want to match this, so we want the player first and then the character. But right now we're doing the character first. So what we want is to pass the player, comma, then the character model. And now that's matching. That's matching what we've got up here. And then I can just do the same here, copy and paste. And instead of character model, we have player.character. So this character here can be nil, or it can be the character. So if we just scroll up to character here. So this is a model controlled... Well, actually, if I just click that, does it show it? Yep. So right here it says local character equals player.character. If not character or not character.parent, wait for that character added event. So this can be nil or it can be a model. So take note, if you see something like model here or objects. Oh, sorry, not objects. Like if it's well, actually there's only one here, which is that model there. So that model can sometimes be nil, so you need to double check that's actually existent. Don't use that one there. Okay, create local player. But using this if statement, we can check whether or not this character is nil or not. And if it is not nil, so if the character has already loaded, call that function manually. And now that we've done that, we can do print get player full name, character get full name. So we actually don't want this print up here anymore on line 9. We only want this print here. So this will activate when our character respawns or spawns in for the first time. So if we play that, we should see players.basic to advanced scripting and basic to advanced scripting. So why is it saying basic to advanced scripting and it's not workspace.basic to advanced scripting? The reason for that is because characters are not immediately parented under workspace. When this triggers, they are still parented to nil because it's creating the character. So what we need to do is put a task.wait or a normal wait. I would use task.wait because it's more efficient and it's the new and improved version of wait. And I highly recommend you use the task library rather than normal things. But apart from that, now let's have a look. Players.basic to advanced, workspace.basic to advanced scripting. So now it is working properly. We both have the player and we have the character, which is what we wanted in our case. So you can use anonymous functions and functions combined to do this, as you can see. So we've explored a couple concepts here. We've got calling functions, we've got anonymous functions, we've got calling named functions and creating them. And then we've also got using anonymous functions to call named functions with arguments. So in this case, we've got player, which is this variable from this function, but also we've got the character model from this event or property. So look back over this if you got a little bit confused. Just go through the video again, go slow, go at your pace so you know what's happening. And yeah, that's functions. That's also a part of what events are. So I kind of did functions and events here. I'll probably combine them into one video. But yeah, hopefully you learnt a lot here because this is important to know and you'll be using functions everywhere. Trust me, it's going to be everywhere. But if you want to learn more about how functions and all that are used, just go to the RPG series GitHub because I'm using functions quite a lot there. So if I show you the Discord here, we have under GitHub feed, you can like click on any of these. I'm just going to click this one. That's going to open up the GitHub page. Ignore that. So it's going to show you code and all that that's being added. But just click up here on Spooky C RPG series project. And that will be the entire project here. Go to SRC. And then that's where the codes are being parented to. So under replicated storage, you'll find core, framework, whatever. If we have a look at framework here, we have local functions, and that's just the local scope for the function. So that's actually faster than just doing function. So take note of that, how I'm using local functions wherever possible. But as you can see, we got function after function after function after function, and we even return a function for this module skirt. So yeah, take note, go through this if you want, or you can watch the Roho tutorial series and then import it to a game so then you can look at the code in Studio. Yeah, hopefully you've learned quite a bit from this. This is important stuff, and I'll see you in the next video, which should be starting to look at the math operators, turning operators, and then later on we'll get to C-frames and vectors, which is going to be mayhem. So I'll see you then.